So the meme thing, what I've been trying to think about is, what are these characters? I want to think about them as characters in the mythological reality, like the heroes and the gods of the old pagan cultures. One thing that they don't have in common with the mythological characters of old is myth is usually a story. There's a character who goes through a thing, there's an adventure, there are these stories that we tell about Hercules or Mars. And when it comes to these memes, these characters that come out of 4chan and then spread further and become the inhabitants of the internet, I think usually the origin story is their reaction memes. They're used to express an emotion. So somebody writes a post and you want to say, I know that feeling. And they post this character Wojak, the feels guy, who has a sad face, and he's the embodiment of this like 4chan user. He's kind of nobody. He's this everyman who's just sitting kind of sad at his computer, who has been scrolling for a very long time, but he can emphasize with the things that he's scrolling past. With that guy, there's the original image and a paragraph of text by the author of the meme, who is anonymous, who kind of proposes this image to express a feeling or a way of looking at things or temperament or personality or something. And then if that thing is successful, that meme replicates, and then it starts to mutate. And then you have 10 different Wojaks showing different kinds of emotions, showing different kinds of aspects of the life of that internet everyman. I thought a good rhyme is, the Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Well, we have this Wojak character who has 1,000 faces. He's sad, he's happy, he knows that feeling, he's alone, he's all of these different things. There's like a Wojak monk. I don't know how that came about, but he's out there in like a hood of a medieval Christian monk or something. And so the tension point between the desire to be able to speak about this in mythological terms and the reality of today is there's not a lot of stories about these characters. These characters exist yet. That's what I'm getting to, yeah. There's not a story yet with Wojak, let's say. So he just exists in, let's say, 100 of different kinds of Wojak, and he just kind of exists in these snippets of experience, right? What he can do is to be sad or to be happy or to feel a connection to something. But they're all disparate. It's just like simultaneously there are these like 100 states he's in, and they're not connected in any kind of a narrative. And then the case of Pepe the Frog is very interesting to me. I've been bringing it up in conversations with you, this whole time. A bunch of times we've talked about it. I'm going to try to summarize the story. He does have a story now, right? And the story did not happen. Nobody wrote that story. Nobody came up with it. There's not a person on 4chan who said, so Pepe starts like this and goes, to this place. The story happened when the meme started interacting with the society at large and entered into political realm with Trump and all that. So let me try to recap the story if I can. There's a guy, a comic artist, who had been making this comic about, I think there are like 4 characters. The vibe of it was sort of college culture. These students who are hanging around and they drink and they play computer games and they have these bullshit conversations. There's just a vibe that was the author's vibe. And it was like, those were stories, those were comic strips, and the characters were just like characters in any other story like that. They're just these entities that he came up with and started playing with and coming up with scenarios for them, and he was the author. Then one particular strip got traction online. There's a face that Pepe makes, and there's a context to that face that resonated with people for whatever reason. He says, feels good, man. The scene is The scene is he's peeing with his pants down, like all the way to the ankles. And a different character is asking him, like, why are you doing that? Why are your pants all the way down?
You don't need to put them all the way down.
And the frog goes, feels good, man. And that was the little joke, completely innocuous, completely had nothing to do, like all of the shit that followed, you wouldn't imagine following from that little thing. But that image resonated with people online, and they just started using that face to say, feels good, man. And then it started mutating, and there appeared the sad Pepe, who would say, feels bad, man. And all of these changes and mutations started happening with this character in that anonymous field. Collective mind was producing these variations. One piece that I didn't know of or didn't think about seriously before watching this documentary, the radicalization of Pepe. How did Pepe become associated with Nazism and racism and anti-Semitism and 9/11 and all of the horrible things? Pepe has gotten so popular that a bunch of celebrities posted him, and people not from this 4chan culture that has its own kind of humor and the identity of being on the fringe. They have the word normie to describe people who are not like them, the mainstream people. They don't like them.
Yeah.
And so when Pepe got so popular that all of these people who have no connection to that anonymous subculture started using him, the anonymous subculture got pissed, and they wanted to make changes to the character so that the normies wouldn't be able to play with it anymore. And so Pepe Hitler appeared, and Pepe Ku Klux Klan member appeared, and Pepe who's flying the plane into the towers on 9/11 appeared, and all of these evil, horrible Pepes appeared with smug smiles on their faces, and people got scandalized, and people didn't want to touch Pepe anymore. And then, this is a weird part of the story that's difficult to pin down, I think, how Pepe became associated with Trump and with the alt-right, because two things I think were happening at the same time. On the one hand, you had, what's his name, Richard Spencer and his crowd. I think he was like maybe the originator of the term alt-right. They do the Heil Hitler salute. So that says something about them, right? So that guy tried to latch on to the story and started using Pepe as a symbol himself. But I think at the same time, what was happening on 4chan is people saw that their meme is now out in the world, and people are having these arguments about him, and people are confused about it. And it was the spilling out of this fringe, weird subculture into the mainstream. And they wanted to double down on that, to play with it, to see what they can do, what Pepe can accomplish in his character, which by now has become this like troll character, a person who fucks with everybody just for the sake of fucking with everybody, to be provocative, to make people lose their mind, lose their shit. And so I think by now you have the situation where political actors want to use Pepe, and then this overmind of 4chan doesn't have a political goal, really. It's not like they wanted to support Trump because of the policies he was suggesting or whatever. They don't have much care or faith in the political system. The election is not a thing that they care about. But Trump is himself a meme of a similar kind. He provokes people for no reason. He says outrageous things. You can put the Hitler Pepe and the Ku Klux Klan Pepe and the 9/11 Pepe, and then in that row you put Trump Pepe, and it makes sense because people who don't like all of that imagery, they also don't like Trump, and now they're scared because there's an actual presidential candidate that is somehow associated with Hitler and all of the things evil. Then you have Hillary Clinton saying Pepe is a hate symbol just like the swastika.
Yeah, she's so out of touch.
And then the 4chan people are celebrating because we made these normies lose their mind. They're fighting a cartoon frog.
Yeah. we got a higher up in a political dynasty to acknowledge that our meme existed in the first place. And not only that, we got an emotional reaction.
He is dangerous. We need to do something about the cartoon frog. That's a threat to our society.
Yeah.
And the 4chan people who usually feel the society doesn't give a shit about them suddenly feel, oh, they care. Oh, they care, and they're afraid.
That's exactly it. Yeah. That's what I'm tying together. Like, oh man, I'm tying all this stuff together. The feels good man thing is relevant to Trump in that it's like, fuck your norms. I do what seems right to me. So there's that aspect, but then there's also what I was talking about with the Christians that were singing at the Lincoln Memorial. They feel like no matter what we say, no matter how logical we are, no matter how valid our ethics or our concerns are, the left and academia are just never going to acknowledge what we possess. And therefore, if we need to have a crazy president who doesn't live by perfect Christian values in order to fight back, well, that's how we're going to do it. It's the same essence in what you're describing. It's like what I have an idea of a collectivity in government, which is, let's face it, it is fascist in nature, and the National Socialism of the Nazism is related to that kind of ethos. They say no matter what we say, nobody on the left is going to take us seriously. They're going to shoot us down over and this happened for 8 years when Obama was in office. It started with Stephen Colbert making fun of George W. Bush on cable. Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert started making fun of George W. Bush. It evolved into a viable Democratic candidate, Barack Obama, who got into office and had a lot of influence. And then as all that happened, people on the right, their opinions were just seen as insignificant. Those are the crazies and the sticks. Those are the kinds of opinions that the crazies and the sticks have. Like as Obama said, in an error that he made in campaigning, they cling to their guns and their God. Well, if that's how you were being treated about your beliefs, you too would put both middle fingers in the air. And so these meme manipulators say, no matter what we post on social media, we're going to get pegged as racists, sexist, bigots, whatever. Well, let's use this meme. If we can use this meme, we could say whatever we want. We take our identities off of it, and we just go into this pure idea, and we'll just torture and influence and poke, and provoke, and like you said, they got amazing results.
For Pepe, I think there's definitely a place in what would you call it? I forget the proper academic discipline that deals with mythology, but there's the concept of trickster, right? There are trickster gods in all of these different mythologies. Like
that's what Peterson says. That's what Milo Yiannopoulos is
exactly. It's a playful character that can't really figure out whether he's evil or good, but he's provoking. There's a story that I read somewhat recently as an example.
Well, that character's not, I just want to interject real quick. That character is not threatening unless the person who watches them themselves is like kind of confused. So wait, this is funny, but I can't laugh at this because if I do, I'm a bad, and the trickster will go there.
That's one thing. The other thing is like with Pepe and the Nazi symbolism is that has been discussed ad nauseum. The tricky thing that they do where they make a joke, or maybe they're not making a joke, and the swastika is a part of it. And for a person on the outside, it can be very disturbing because they're like, is this innocuous, or is this the most evil thing that there is? And the danger that the people concerned with these things would point out is that's a way for the swastikas and the Nazi symbolism to get into mainstream. At one point, there were these physical offline rallies with people who were representing the Republic of Kekistan. Because one other thing that happened to Kek is he became an ancient Egyptian god of chaos, Kek, because there was the Egyptian god of chaos who had the head of a frog. And there's this whole other thing about World of Warcraft. It's a rich story. But when this new version of Keke appeared, that is the Egyptian god of chaos, whose name is Kek, then the next thing that happened is the Republic of Kekistan appeared as an image. And that republic's flag looked very similar to the not the like official flag of Nazi Germany, but I think their military flag with a cross, except instead of the swastika, it I think had some arrangement of the letters, either KEK, Kek, or LOL, which is the same thing as Kek. Again, it's trolling. So it's like the flag says, basically, I find it funny that you're going to find this disturbing, but it's very clearly designed to be disturbing. And then you have, in real physical space in America, in a city, these people who go to a rally and they carry a flag that looks very much like a Nazi flag, but they're like, no, we're joking. And that is a weird, dangerous, strange situation.
That's where it left the screen. Right. It's not virtual anymore. That's an important component of that.
Right. And so all of these things that are happening, there's a narrative to it. Pepe is mutating and going through these different versions of himself, some of which are really disturbing and evil. And one of them is Donald Trump, the president of the country, who tweeted out an image of himself as Pepe. And meanwhile, the guy who created the character is struggling to deal with this because now Hillary Clinton says he created a swastika. You know, and people in the streets are approaching him. It actually is also fitting, I think, to the story that guy, he's like, I don't want to do anything with politics. I like to draw frogs. I like college humor. I'm the most...
Yeah, he's like...
Exactly. And it's almost like the illustration of that saying, you know, if you don't want to deal with politics, politics is going to deal with you. That's what happened to that guy.
Yeah.
And so all of this turmoil is happening in Pepe world. The final chapter, for now, is that the story kind of died out, I guess, with Pepe. People talked about him, and it was this like frustrating thing, and then it's just people moved on to something different. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Pepe becomes a symbol of protest in Hong Kong. A democratic protest. There's nothing, there's no evil about him. There's no Nazi symbolism, none of this like vile stuff. Instead, it's a peaceful democratic protest, and people are holding little toy Pepes. They're holding images of Pepe. Suddenly, he pops up in the other part of the world as a completely different character, and there are these interviews with people in the streets like, what's up with the frog? Why are you carrying the frog to this thing? And they're like, well, I like him because he looks kind of sad and he's so cute. And it's a whole different vibe. That artist did something right. That frog has a lot of potential, like, what would you call it in evolutionary terms? He is fit, right?
Memeability?
He's a successful, just like some species die out and others adapt to the situation. This frog is very adaptable. The thing that I need to think through, and maybe not even think through, but just work with and see what happens, is I sent you, I think you've seen this like little draft animation that I have for a conversation I had with John Horgan, where I'm making... I'm making an animation for the audio part of the podcast, and I'm playing with characters to replace myself and John. And the current stage is one version of that Fields guy, Wojak guy, as a stand-in for me, and the Minotaur, and it all takes place in the Minotaur's maze, and John is Minotaur. And this is just... It really is just like I found this app that allows me to make animations, and I'm just learning what to do with it. And so I need to use some kind of character, and so it intuitively evolves into something or other. But in making that Wojak character, in putting him in the traditional mythological context of the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, and that's all situated within the ancient Greek mythology and all that, made me realize that he's actually perfectly positioned to be the traditional mythological character as we think of them in like Campbell's framework, right? He is the starting point. He is the hero who doesn't have heroic characteristics. He's Frodo, who's sitting in his hobbit land. He's the hero before the call to action, before the call to adventure. And so you can create an adventure for that guy and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Every episode starts again with that character chilling in their crib. And then you go and have him do whatever. It's like Jerry Seinfeld's apartment.
Or you have a long arc, like he changes and evolves as he goes on to these adventures, which are made of conversations. You can do different things with it.
Mm-hmm. I like many people who came from a religious childhood. I didn't have a very religious childhood, but I did go to Catholic school, so I went to Mass at school every week. My parents weren't especially religious, but at any rate, I had that fun. And like many people who kind of leave the church and become atheists and science-oriented people, I went through that period of like wondering what's it all about and everything. And then I started noticing, that there were reasons people had these myths and stories and everything and religions. And I started seeing things like, I thought a lot about Star Wars, which that's not unrelated to Campbell. Cause I mean, that was a Hollywood convention for quite a while to use the Campbellian form for narrative construction. And I started watching Star Wars and the Marvel and the DC movies, the superhero movies. And I said, oh, these people are doing mythology. It's just, instead of doing the ancient mythologies, they're doing modern mythologies. And they have the characters and they're interacting and they're doing the stories. And I said, well, that's great. Now we have these modern secular templates where we can do what religion used to do. But there was a rub. And the rub was copyright. Mm-hmm. You can't go and make your own Batman thing unless you go through the proper channels of the licensing. That's not to say it's impossible, and people do that. And maybe I just needed to think of the problem being bigger. Like maybe that's how it, in that particular form of movie magic mythology, in that particular form, the way that the collective narrative, the collective story gets created is you have to go through this democratic process of whether you can get a job working for people that are going to allow you access to the licensing to then be able. You have to go through the hierarchy to be able to do that. So only the people who are sophisticated enough and in touch enough with the culture at large are able to rise through that hierarchy and get to the puppet string thing where they can make Batman. They can make a pick where Joaquin Phoenix plays mentally ill Joker in a more real setting. So that's one way to do it. Maybe there is an analogy between Hollywood and the church. There's an institution, a gatekeeper that controls the creation and the altering of mythological stories.
There was an element to the Pepe story of this copyright battle, which was interesting. So it was between the creator of Pepe and Alex Jones, who started selling at one point these posters of the deplorables. There's Trump and Roger Stone and Bannon and Trump Jr., I forget who else. And among them, there's Pepe. So they are the basket of deplorables. And the guy was not happy about it, and he filed whatever you file, law complaint. And they went to battle through these video depositions. I think it was settled outside the court, and Jones paid some sum of money and stopped selling the poster. But there is an interesting point there, that the trick that Jones's lawyers did with the creator of Pepe, where I think they talk for a while about the creative process and how Pepe comes about. They somehow trick him into making the argument for, like, this is a copyright infringement. I'm the author of this character, and all of these other Pepes are not, that's not okay. And then they show him a sequence of images of his characters in his comics and characters from Sesame Street and other popular culture stories, cartoons and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's very clear that he derived a lot of his character from these other ones, and he doesn't think that's a problem because that's what you do. It's very clear that there's a clash there. You're saying that I can do this because that's the creative process, but you want to protect your character when it comes to other people changing it and making these other versions of it. But it is an interesting thing, and I think it's kind of like an American thing, where many of these disputes are set in this competitive court setting. I mean, it's not like the court is unique to America, though. I guess that the thing that I would like to point to, that I've been just thinking about recently in terms of what America is there's the competitive nature of everything that's going on. The court case is this competition in storytelling. It doesn't seem like these sides that really want to try to figure out what the just outcome is. It's a competition between the defense and the prosecution that kind of owns the competitive storytelling nature of the process. And the reason it was on my mind, regardless of Pepe's story, is what's happening now with the Constitutional Court. So I don't know anything about the particular people, the judges that are there. I don't know the judge who is deceased now. And the news that she died came to me when I was in a rural area in Russia where there was not a lot of reception. I only saw the headline. And I think I saw some guys saying, okay, this is really, really bad. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think just from those two pieces of information, without knowing anything else, without knowing who this woman was, without knowing any of the details of the situation, I think my assessment of the situation was, I had to explain to my girlfriend. She doesn't know what the Supreme Court is. She doesn't know about the American structure. And I had to give this overview that I think is correct, even though I know nothing about it. And the overview was that many of what we think of as laws, as these fundamental things in America, like the right to abortion, are not really laws. That's not legislature. That's a decision that was made by the court in a case, and because of the precedent right or rule, it becomes the law of the land. And the highest instance of this decision making is these 9 people, and they always seem to be divided 4 to 5 by this is the one side and the other side, because everything in America is divided into these two sides, the liberals and the conservatives. And so the interesting part here to me is this is the Supreme Court, this is the Constitutional Court. These are supposed to be the people who uphold what the framing document is supposed to say. This is how we make sure we're on the same page as to what our sacred document says. And that's done through the same kind of competition. There are the two sides. So again, I didn't know who this woman was. I didn't know anything about the situation, but I saw a Supreme Court justice died and some guy saying, okay, this is really bad. Why is it really bad? Well, because Trump then can push his candidate in, and then his team will have more power in this decision-making process that will define what the foundational laws are. So the interesting thing to me, and you tell me now if I got all of this wrong, but the interesting thing here to me is that what the foundations of the country are, what the Constitution says, figuring out how does the Constitution apply to these decisions that we should be making now, that is also done through this competitive storytelling.
Interesting way to frame it, yeah.
It's competitive storytelling.
Yeah. So then you sort of can make the case that what America is, what law is, what these foundational patterns of figuring out how society is going to work, all of that is done through, let's say, competitive storytelling, the different kinds of competition, business competition, arguments, debates, the cases that the prosecution and the defense make in court. And there definitely is, again, from the outside, from just watching these documentaries and stuff, there definitely is this storytelling quality to it, where the defense knows that they don't only need to present the facts, they need to tell a compelling story, they need to show the defendant in the correct light, they need to bring in witnesses, not only because here's the relevant information that they have for the case. No, they need to tell a compelling story so that the jury feels compassion to the defendant or feels empathy to the victim that the defendant is accused of murdering or whatever. So it's all competitive culture making. These different forces are in constant battle as to who decides what Pepe is. You know, is it an innocuous character or is he a Nazi? And I'm kind of going on a long tangent here. To make a political point, at the end of it, I would say that the right is somehow, like in Pepe's case, they're better at this competition. I think the left, or maybe the radical left, gives up on symbols easier.
Well, interesting.
Because there's such an emphasis on cultural diversity.
Yeah, I suppose. But there is like another, a more fundamental symbol than the cartoon frog is the American flag. And I remember seeing, like, I went to some protests in America when I was there. It was the kind of first wave of Black Lives Matter, I suppose. And I remember this confusion about the American flag at these protests, where somebody would carry an American flag and other people would criticize them for it because we're like protesting the horrible system. And that person then would have to defend, no, like, I want America to be better. I don't want America to not exist. I don't want to give up on America. I want America to be different. And this flag is my flag. It doesn't belong to the police. It doesn't belong to the government. But that kind of guy, I think, was in the minority at those protests.
Definitely.
I was thinking back to the Ken Kesey, Hunter S. Thompson type characters who were very much the counterculture, who were doing the drugs that you could get in jail for possessing, and were in this like cultural battle against the mainstream, but they owned their own Americanism. And I think the current left isn't doing that. I'm trying to make this analogy between Pepe and the American flag. Like that guy, the creator of Pepe, at one point launched a campaign, Save Pepe or something like that, where he was asking people to post good, wholesome Pepes to reclaim him. And I don't think that worked very well. People eventually kind of forgot about that character in America, and then he popped up in Hong Kong. But when the two sides fight for a symbol, I think the right has a better grip on it. They're better at claiming the symbol and then sometimes making it so that the other side can't use it anymore. This is now ours.